Okay, Patti Matsuda, welcome to Tuesdays with Mike. How are you?
I am good, and thank you for having me on, Mike. It's really a joy and a
I
privilege.
am so looking forward to just conversing with you. I know we're going to laugh. I know we're going to talk about baseball,
Mhm.
and I know we're going to learn things. And I really always value my time with you because it always feels so genuine. Patty, when you're with a person or you're at a ball game, you're there, you're present, and I know that. Uh, so let's get started and help our listeners learn a little bit about you as a person and potentially even just lean into your journey as to how a person arrives to where you are today.
So the journey is sometimes not the path that you expect. And
Mhm.
I will honestly say that I knew that I wanted to go into health professions when I was in high school, but I thought that that journey would take me more towards becoming a physician.
Mhm.
And when I was in high school, I didn't really know about physical therapy, which is sort of one caveat I want to put out there for listeners is to really get out there and share about your profession and what you do, because high school and middle school are the two places that people really start looking towards the future and making conscious decisions about what they'll do in the future. So fortunately, I had a neighbor who went through a program and she said, well, had you ever thought about physical therapy? And I hadn't. And so I volunteered at a local hospital and saw what they did and thought this could be a career for me.
Mhm.
Um, so when I went into college, and that was, or at university, and that was the University of Washington, um, I set my sights on physical therapy, having put in volunteer hours, the observation hours that are required for school. And I went into the profession when it was still a bachelor's degree. So that dates me a bit, but it was really awesome. And I was so grateful to be accepted into a program, to explore all facets of it. And there are so many more now than there were back then. There are so many opportunities that are out there for new grads. And so if you're a new grad, I'm speaking to you to really explore all that physical therapy has to offer. And and I thought I would go into pediatrics when I went into school. And I
Mhm.
ended up in neuro. And the
Mhm.
reason being, and then geriatrics subsequently, but the reason for that was I had an awesome clinical instructor for
Mhm.
one of my, or two of my rotations that were solidly in rehab and another rehab facility that was not in the Seattle area. And I fell in love with the patient population, with how we could really make a difference in people's lives and everything that they had ahead of them, we could help them to achieve their goals and to participate back in life. My other inspiration was I had a cousin who had a spinal cord injury back in the late 1950s when there was really no spinal cord injury rehabilitation to speak of.
Mhm.
And I saw what my uncle had to do to care for him every single day. There were no facilities to send him to, no long-term communities that really helped to promote independence. And so my uncle was his full-time caregiver.
Mhm.
And my cousin really didn't have the ability to do things on his own. And so that was another inspiration for going into PT as well.
Yeah.
So I practiced for a lot of years in a bunch of settings, probably
Okay.
every single setting that you could possibly imagine,
Mhm.
spanning the continuum, with the exception of pediatrics. So interesting. The last time I did it, I was in my clinical experiences, and I found that I lacked the creativity to work with really young kids. And at the
Mm,
time, I hadn't been exposed to a lot of kiddos.
mm,
So I don't know if that would change now, but
yeah,
back then, I think I would have been just every day brain drain, having to come up with a different game and
yeah,
to try and get at what we're getting at. But that's not to say that it doesn't happen with other ages, age
sure.
ranges.
Yeah,
So practiced for a while, was in a lot of different positions from a site clinical coordinator to a supervisor to a manager to a service line manager. So got to see the other end of things that you don't learn about in school.
yeah.
Um, and then uh, I got a call from the University of Washington, and Mark Guthrie was one of my clinical instructors, and he became the division head of the physical therapy program.
Okay,
And they were looking to cover somebody's sabbatical. And this was in neuro. I had been going out and doing a class in neurorehabilitation for some years, two different classes, and said, well, this one you'd be covering somebody. And the somebody was Anne Shumway Cook. And I thought, well, I'm pretty much going to fall out of my chair right this second. And he goes, you just need to come in for an interview. So went in for the interview, and I was just in awe of pretty much everything about her. And
mm,
if people have read like the myriads of articles she's been involved in, follow postural control at all, balance, fall prevention, the dynamic gait index, and all of that, to be sitting in a room looking at her and having you being interviewed by her, um, it was a lot to take in. And it was daunting too to think that I was being considered to take her classes while she was on sabbatical.
yeah.
So we finished our interview, and I thought, well, thank goodness we're done. And um, and she goes, well, you better go down the hall and talk to Mark about starting. And
Mm,
that was the beginning of a really unexpected, but such a blessing in a relationship because, Mike, you know as well as I do that being in her universe is
yeah.
pretty awesome.
Yes.
So I took over teaching applied neurology to her, to second year students at the
Hmm.
time. And so I came on a year in advance. I kept working in the clinic, and then she ended up going on sabbatical, and I taught that class the next year. And then when she came back, she wanted me to stay on to teach with her.
Okay.
And so that was an amazing experience because I learned probably as much as the students did to, again, just it's like
Yeah.
taking continuing ed every day.
Right.
And then I ended up doing a lot of work with her. So I was splitting my time in the clinic and being out
Yeah.
at the U. So I started teaching geriatrics with her as well, which was her other course, designated course. And then all this time I was thinking, well, we tran we went and became a DPT program right in the middle of things. And so I thought, I only have a BS, and if I'm going to really teach and be credible at it, I better go back and get my DPT.
Yeah.
So I got my transitional doctorate at A.T. Still University, Arizona School of Health Sciences, and it was totally like online
Hmm.
and just had to show up for graduation with your
Yeah.
project. And then, yeah, you know the drill. And then when I finished, the UW was getting set to start its first cohort in a PhD in rehabilitation medicine. And so they wanted me to write a letter of endorsement as to why this program would be good for the
Hmm.
university, for our profession, in general. And I did that. And then they go, well, aren't you going to apply? And I thought, well, would I get in? And so I made the decision. I thought after I got my transitional doctorate that that would be it, and I
Yeah,
could teach with that. But I was really encouraged because at the time they said, well, if you really want to stay at a research R1 university,
yeah,
you really need to have a PhD. And so I decided to do it because my mentor through this whole process was Anne. And, again, you can't
yeah,
link up with a stronger, more research oriented, with a passion that just
yeah,
to inspire. And so um, I did, and I got in. And I'm not going to lie, I was teaching at the same time. And Mike, you know this too, and being in the
yeah,
clinic, and it was a long, hard road, but I would say every single minute was worth it.
yeah.
And there were a lot of other people who would have loved to have been in my shoes at the time.
Hmm. Yeah,
And then for those of you who are going through your pursuing a PhD, finding your dissertation topic is never an easy thing. And so I may have come out the other end with falls in MS, but that was my third option.
is that
And I
right?
think, yeah, so one was going to be an exercise program that was administered in the community to with aging and disability services. And then that funding fell through. There was another
Mm-hmm.
idea about uh, I can't even remember now, but it was also exercise related
Hmm.
to an underserved population. And so I think in the end, they took pity on me and gave me a data set to analyze and look at. And that's how I sort of fell into it a bit
Yeah,
serendipitously. So,
yeah,
and I haven't looked back. It's been great. And I met and worked
yeah,
with a lot of great people with that. So, and
yeah,
then took a position with the U and went on faculty. And so been on faculty for about 25 years now.
yeah. That's amazing. That's an amazing journey. And it's exactly what I would expect from you, Patty, knowing you, filled with more humility than you needed to place in there. So I appreciate that. You deserved, they're asking you to write a letter of endorsement, and you're wondering if you can get into the program, which is very Patti Matsuda like. But what a wonderful story and wonderful journey, which allowed you, if I'm seeing and hearing this correctly, to continue to invest in yourself, but never looking at it for yourself. And then always paying back because you're teaching while you're going to school and you're always giving back while you're in the clinic and in teaching and in school all at the same time, and you're amassing this and you're drinking through a fire hose, but you're genuinely glad and thankful that you're even there. You're not saying, oh my gosh, who could handle this, and etc. You're absorbing it, and now you're at in that position where you're able to gift back for 2.5 decades plus, and just really absorbing all those opportunities and now being the mentor that you received also, because we know that's the case. You take such joy in mentorship, and that's one thing that I've truly learned additionally from you and love about you being so proud of your students and introducing them to me at CSM or this meeting or that we're at together. You're so joyful and proud of your students, and I love your mentorship capacities, which is one of the many skills and attributes
Oh,
about you. Yeah,
thank you. Yeah, well, we were all students and
yeah,
at one time, and the students look at us like they look at you or any other faculty member, and they they go, wow, they have such big brains. So what is it about them?
yeah,
Look at everything they know. And I said, do you know that we all sat in that chair and that we all came from someplace? And it's because of the investment of a lot of other people that we get to where we are.
yeah,
And then they sit back and they go, oh, really? And I think um, the other sort of unexpected part is you get to work and meet so many different people. Like when Anna and I were doing research, we had the opportunity to come down to your fabulous clinic. It was one of our first choices to run research with you and Brady. And that's how our relationship sort of blossomed. And you took our neuro resident under your wing, who you're
Yes.
now teaching with, which is like such a proud moment, I
Yeah.
think, for both of us with Shannon and
Yeah.
watching her growth. And there is no greater joy. I think, you're teaching yourself not only physical therapists, but students, and you see what they're going to become because they're the future. They're going to get all this tech. They're digital natives. They know how to use it very well, much better than myself. I'm probably lacking in a lot of those areas,
Mhm.
but they're going to be the ones who are going to be our future, the
Yeah.
the people who are going to carry on um, physical therapy and the banner of it. And
Yeah.
it's really exciting to see them sort of learn, the light bulbs go off, and then they
Right.
make their decision and then they fly. And
Right.
and I know, and you probably felt double that with your daughter. So,
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I have twins that are PTs, so yes, in
oh
fact,
yeah,
that
so
is the
both of
case. Yeah.
them, see?
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting though, Patty, and I'm just drawing this analogy for the first time.
Mhm.
I wonder if you feel the same, that a neuro rehabilitation experience is not unlike being a mentor, where we take some of the most impaired people. We can analogize that to some of the persons who are most novice in their education. And we see all of this potential, and we're excited about all this potential. And we attempt to make a strong, impactful, meaningful difference with someone that cannot walk to the point that they can walk independently, with someone that does not know anatomy to the point that they're applying anatomy independently into neuroanatomy and neurorehabilitation. So I wonder if you would agree, does that resonate with you as an analogy of why we have such an affinity toward mentorship?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, when you are the therapist with working with the person, you do become like a mentor.
Sure.
Anne's brought that forth a lot. And
Hmm.
the thing about working with patients now is that over the years, due to a lot of research, we have a lot more tools in our tool belt. And
Hmm.
so when I came out, what? Neuroplasticity? What is that? And now we've got the 10 principles. You have this
Yeah.
awesome course on neuroplasticity to like translate the research into the clinic. So there are so many things that now we can use to really come alongside and partner with our patients and their families. I think that's the other joy of working in neuro rehab is that you really get to know them and connect. I think a lot of it you brought up before is connection. We connect
Hmm.
with our students in the same way we need to connect with our patients
That's
and
right.
really drive at
Hmm.
what is most important to them, right?
Hmm.
And then when they graduate, when they get out from, graduate from the unit or they go into,
Yeah.
home health, they come back as an
Yeah.
outpatient and you see them and you're thinking, yes, this is why I got into this profession.
Yeah.
Um, because we get to spend time with patients, we get to know them as they are now. Sometimes,
Hmm.
it really makes you long to that you had seen them prior
Yeah.
to their major stroke event or their
Yeah.
diagnosis, what have you. Um, and then, when you look at the geriatric population too, you're helping them to look to the future, that aging is not such a negative thing
Yeah.
and it can be very positive and we have a huge role and I know that you talked to Mike Putoff about that too because I watched that podcast and heard that and I think this just shows the many roles that we have, the many hats that we can wear, and it's a real privilege to work it. But I think your analogy is really a strong
Yeah.
one. I might have to use that with the students.
Well, yes, you have a therapeutic alliance that we attempt to build with patients,
Mhm.
and you have an academic alliance that we attempt to build with our students. And those relationships then exist beyond the walls that they started in, the clinic and the classroom, for sure.
Yeah. And I think too, I go back to a lot of your work, recent work with mindfulness and getting into a headspace that's really healthy for our patients, providers too. But I think sometimes we forget about the patients because they're having to work so hard. And in neuro, there is such a life change. There's usually an event that brings them to us in
Mm,
rehabilitation. And so it's not always easy, and you don't always have uh, a psychologist at the ready,
mm, mhm,
but we have time to sit during our treatment t sessions, and
mm.
sometimes you'll hear a lot. And
Yeah,
so, that's the other powerful tool that we have is listening
right.
to them and hearing what's going on, and then being able to approach that in
You
different ways.
probably saw some of that in some of your earliest mentorship that you didn't even know you were getting when you watched your uncle and your cousin. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I did. And I think it was hard because my uncle, he had the biggest heart and was so patient, and because my cousin was so young when it happened, he was 18.
Mm,
Um and he was much older than I was. Uh
mm.
but he got frustrated, and that
Sure.
frustration would just lash out in just not so great ways.
Yeah.
But my uncle never veered from just being the steady provider
Mm,
for him,
yeah.
and much to his credit, demonstrated love. He was a totally dependent transfer.
Yeah.
There were no
Wow.
such things as motorized wheelchairs when he got out, and then he developed a lot of contractures. And so,
Hmm.
if it had happened even like 15 years later, it would have been so different. And I think
Yeah.
that's where technology and our profession is really evolving.
Yeah.
And it's just going to get even more amazing.
Yeah.
And students graduating now, I just sort of look at them and I think, my gosh, you are going to have a lot of more things at the ready to use, but don't just rely on AI and chat GPT and
Yeah.
you need to put in that work and it's going to pay off.
Yeah. As we wrap this segment up, I'll tell you one thing that I genuinely feel and express to every cohort that I get the opportunity to communicate with. And who knows how much longer my career in academia will be, but I still have the fortune to touch a few different schools on the regular basis. And I say, you are graduating at the perfect time to become a physical therapist. And I do know that there are difficulties in student loans and expenses and reimbursement. But from the opportunity and the landscape of let's just say, the variety of touch points, clinical and non-clinical career decisions, technologies that they have at the ready and available, I do think that I genuinely mean, wow, this is a very powerful, impactful, and wonderful time to be in your position. So uh, let's talk about, you brought up the word just a moment ago, evolve, and I'd like to throw a curveball, a literal curveball
Curveball.
into the conversation right now, because we're going to next jump to the evolution of, as you've mentioned, going from neurologic rehabilitation and sliding a little bit more toward geriatrics, but never leaving neurology. But before we get there, when you're standing on a pitcher's mound and you're 60 feet 6 inches away from a batter, and they just saw the fastball that we threw in this interview because we came in hard and fast with a lot of powerful information. Let's change the batter's bat speed up a little bit and throw a curveball, because you and I have also kindled our friendship over the love of baseball.
Mhm.
You're wearing a Seattle Mariners jersey today, Ichiro Suzuki, number 51, proudly. who's
For
also my
you,
favorite player. Yes, and thank you. Yeah,
in
yeah.
your honor.
Tell me about your history and love for baseball, if you will.
I got my love of baseball from my mom, actually.
Is that
And
right? Okay.
yeah, and she said, she grew up in a time when there was no TV. And so she would listen. Unfortunately, at the time, there were no Seattle teams, but
Yeah.
she listened to the Yankees. And so, but over time, they were, not her favorite team. And she
Yeah.
taught me how to score. She taught me how to do everything.
Wow.
And fast
Yeah.
forward to when I started working as a PT, we had a Seattle Hospital League, and my hospital fielded a team.
Huh.
So I ended up, one of my friends who was working in the department at the time, he was a pitcher, and I ended up being a catcher. So that's why pretty much all my favorite players are catchers, with the exception of Ichiro.
Okay.
And right now I'm a huge Cal Raleigh fan.
Well,
So
I would assume.
and I have been, I was a big Dan Wilson fan too.
Okay.
So
Wow.
yeah, and that's where it's sprung from. So now we're in a group of season ticket holders for the Seattle Mariners that
Yeah.
sprung from my PT department. We all bought in, and
Yeah.
they all knew that over time they would retire one by one, and then they could take like the afternoon games. And so we've
Right.
been together for, I can't even imagine. And a lot of people have moved or dropped out. We have one person who travels up here from Medford, Oregon. Or wait, no, not Medford, but over by Bend.
Okay.
So yeah, she comes up and
That
she's
could be
still a part.
Madras then.
Yeah, so she's still a part of our group, which
Wow.
is true devotion.
Yeah.
Right? So even through the lean years, she did. And
Yeah.
so it forged a lot of friendships, but that's
Yeah.
why. And then I admire you because you come up for, before I do all the Ichiro like special things. And so you put me onto that before we even have our draw.
Yeah.
So I knew already. But Ichiro embodies like a lot
Yeah.
of different disciplines, and he,
Yeah.
he's still, I think he could still go out there and play when I
I'm
watch
sure.
him.
Yeah.
And watch
Yeah.
him at spring training with Julio Rodriguez, and they're
Yeah.
like throwing, he's just chucking the ball so
Yeah.
far, and Julio has to back way up, and so I just admire the discipline even
Yeah.
now when he's
Yeah.
retired.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think that's what makes him an incredible player, and
Yeah.
there's a lot of analogies that you could draw to life
Right.
from that. So, and I admire you because you went to his Hall of Fame induction. So I was getting real-time updates by text
Yes,
message
you were.
from you.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we just circled back to mentorship again with Ichiro and Julio there. So we have a common through line already. Uh, let's put the toe to the rubber again and come back and let's talk a little bit about how your career has evolved in the interests and pursuits that you've taken, clinical, academic, continuing education, and research. Feel free to elaborate there on how you did unfold that portion of your career.
So I never thought I'd get into research.
Mhm.
Again, it's the unexpected journey. Um, Working with Anne, and Anne had so many things in the fire. And one of the things she wanted to do before she retired from the profession, research was her primary love, and that was the last thing that she ended up sort of retiring from, if you will. And so she wanted to make alterations to the DGI. And so she
Mhm.
modified it, and that's where you
Yeah,
and Brady and a lot of different sites came in, and
yeah,
we
yeah,
amassed data. What I learned from that uh, is people are really willing and very interested in doing research in the clinic, and it's totally possible.
yeah,
I think sometimes people feel like, oh, well, that's for the people who are at the big universities, or whatever school. And that's absolutely not true. I
Hmm.
think it's very important to do clinical research that because clinicians are on the front lines, and so they're going to know what's going to work and what's not. And I think it's really important. I've sort of uh, moved from just quantitative to really doing qualitative work, um,
Hmm.
getting perspectives of patients, but also the people who, clinicians and students. This last one, I also roped in the students to get their perspective because it's a real important one as you transition into the clinic. The other thing I learned from research is don't be afraid to reach out to those people who you're reading their research and you're really interested. And it's like, oh, but I can't approach them. I
Yeah.
can't, you know, do this. And that's how I came about to be in the International MS Fall Prevention Research Network. I was reading a lot of work from coming out of Chicago by an OT named Marcia Finlayson. And
Yeah.
Elizabeth Peterson was a colleague of hers there, and she was doing a lot of work in fear of falling.
Mm,
And we had CSM in Chicago, and
mm.
goes, well, maybe you can meet up with her. And I said, are you kidding me? And she goes, well, why don't you just email her? She's, if she's a first author, her email
Yeah.
address is going to be there. So I did. And she wrote back. And so I got looped into her orbit too,
Mm,
and met a lot of wonderful people who were doing a lot of research at the time in fall prevention in people with MS, enough
mm.
that I got invited to go to a conference in Canada where we were just trying to come up with what we should be looking at. And all these people who I had been reading their research were there. And talk about little fish, big pond.
Yeah.
But, never be afraid to reach out. And I think that was the big thing that I tell
Yeah.
our residents and our students. All they can say is no,
Hmm.
but you have to take a chance if you really
Yeah.
want it. And so, that's why, like, Shannon reached out to you and Julie Hirschberg. She goes, well, no, I
Yeah.
can't do that. And I'm like, well, yeah, you can. And I said, I'm living proof of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's just getting over that initial
Yeah.
sort of, oh my gosh, they're different from me. And it's just like, but
Yes.
no, we really want to interact with you. And so, and again, Michelle Lusardi, she's
Mm,
another mentor. And so,
yeah.
went up to her after she gave her Carol B. Lewis lecture.
Yeah.
And because Mike had mentioned that too, and then ended up on this task force. So a lot of times what has happened both in research and sort of getting into the APTA and national level is just volunteer.
Yes. 100%.
Volunteer, apply because it's going to be a wonderful experience. No matter where you are in your career, you get to work with some amazing people who are not necessarily in your own backyard.
Yeah.
And it really broadens your perspective and it makes you grow. I think you learn so much from participating at these task forces and Mike, you're a perfect example of this, where you're in two sort of worlds with the geriatric and the neuro, and now your forays into the education part of things, and it just you meet the nicest people and you get to interact with them, you get to work with them. And and then that becomes you one day.
That's
And
right.
then again, we're going back to mentorship. And so that's that's how my career has sort of taken on a
Yeah.
life of its own is through these things that present themselves. So even if you're just a little bit interested in the state or your local or the national level, take that chance.
Yeah,
Don't let
yeah,
it go by because this is our future
yeah,
in physical therapy, and you have a voice. I think people think that they don't, but they do.
yeah. There's a couple things that I gleaned from what you've just said, and I want to reflect back and give you an opportunity to uh, agree or contradict. I believe that a person should never go into volunteership in an effort to serve themselves. However, with that said, I believe with some degree of accuracy, about every 1 hour you give, or let's just say 1% that you give of your time, there's about a 1 to 20 ROI on this. And again, you would never want to volunteer for the ROI, but
Right.
so many people don't understand the amount that you get back just from volunteering, both in how it makes you feel and as you've very clearly elucidated, the things that you learn, the diverse persons you become in contact with, and becoming known and not seeing yourself as, and here's the second point, it's okay to see yourself as a small fish, but you cannot have such an imposter syndrome that you no longer think of yourself as a fish, right?
Yeah.
So they're like me, these occupational therapists that you communicated with at CSM in Chicago, or at least in Chicago. You need to at least see yourself as a fish. And it's okay that you create some diminution of yourself, make yourself smaller than you actually are, is totally fine. And I know there's no such word as diminution, but I like to create words. Uh,
It's a good
so it's
word.
okay to think of yourself as a small fish, but you have to think
Mhm.
of yourself as a smish, as a fish, and just feel free and invited to go ahead and make contact with people. Yeah,
Yeah. Networking is,
yeah,
it's a huge opportunity and that opens more doors
yeah,
for you. Again, it can be one that usually they're ones that you want to go through, but ones that may have not have presented itself if you
yeah.
hadn't taken the chance, right?
Mm.
And
That
so,
puts us. Go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, I'm just thinking what you just dropped right there puts us beautifully on the fourth point that I wanted to cover for us today. And that is not only the through line of mentorship, which we've touched in every one of our three segments today, but also this consideration of the willingness to subject yourself to a reasonable amount of stress and fear, facing those fears. So, whether you would like to tackle this concept of patients that are faced with adversity, a diagnosis, or a challenging task in front of me that I feel uncertain about my capacities. Or you see this in terms of your own career and you want to answer it in that light. What have
Mhm.
you learned along the way about people facing challenges of fear, stereotypes of aging, severe frailty or impairment that you would like to impart upon us?
I think it's really important. It's a great question. I don't know that there's any one single answer,
Hmm.
but what came to mind, or the word that came to mind, um, is empowerment.
Oh,
Um, I
mhm.
think when we see, and I said this before, right? You would really like to get to know some of these patients, like what they were like before maybe they had their stroke, or you see them down the road, and they've had Parkinson's disease, and you know that they had a life before that diagnosis. Um, but for those that are living with neurologic diagnosis, I think it would be really easy to feel like decisions are being made for you, or
Mm,
there's only one road that they can travel. And they need to know that they have choices to make. They have a life to live, and it's really important that we tap into what matters most to them. If you were to
mm,
take it from the geriatric 5 M's,
mm,
what matters most is key. And so, what does matter most to them, and how can we empower them to take ownership of now the choices that are in front of them and not sort of dictating, well, you're going to do this and then you're going to do this next. But I think you all outlined that beautifully in a lot of your work is to really give them choice. And, this is not going to be put upon you. And yes, this is really terrible, but we can work with them. And I think that's the beauty
Mm,
of any therapy, any rehabilitation medicine provider, is that you could really come alongside them in a time that's really like it's literally life-changing.
yeah.
And for those of them who are, say, living with MS, with a spinal cord injury, with Parkinson's disease, this is going to be a lifelong um, sort of change that they will need to address,
Mm,
imposed on that, the changes that happen with aging. With older adults, um, sometimes I think they think, well, it's inevitable.
mhm.
I'm going to fall. Something's going to happen. I've had patients go, the golden years. What in the heck are those? Because I certainly don't feel it now with all the changes. Yet um, things can be better. And keeping them mobile, which is the number one thing they want to be able to do, because with mobility goes independence, and those two sort of run hand in hand. And the literature totally bears that out. Then it's important to address again what what is the most important to them. Is it mobility? Is it
Yeah.
their ability to go out into the community and do the things that they love or get to their bridge game, or or it may be just as simple as I don't need any assistance or rely on anybody to walk or to stand up from a chair. It could be very easy things. And
Hmm.
again, just really saying you're not powerless in this,
Yeah.
really can take control. And I think, that's why keeping these populations healthy and well, as much as we can, we as physical therapists have a huge role in that. And it's not just when we meet them. This is like physical therapy can go for the lifetime in
Yeah.
giving them and providing them information and education about different things, especially in how to keep healthy, how to keep active, and as independent as they can. And so I guess, yeah, that's why the first word that came to mind was empowerment.
That's beautiful. And I think if there's a singular through line to what I've heard and learned about you today, is that at every touch point and stage in your career, at every place in the continuum of care and academia, you have been devoting yourself to empowering people to be able to achieve their pursuits, their preferred directions. Not empowering by imposing, but empowering by engaging.
Mhm.
And that's a beautiful, beautiful thing that you've done because I've seen you and I have incidentally shared a couple of patients through different circumstances.
Mhm.
You and I have incidentally shared a couple of colleagues through different circumstances, usually due to your own wonderful hand. But you've empowered people, and I've seen that throughout. It's beautiful. Um, Patty, I want to tell you a funny story that you may never have known. Okay,
Okay, I'm
if
ready.
you if you know this, you'll have to stop me. But I'll ask you, do you know how the study that we came to work most closely on came to fruition? It happened at combined sections meeting. And I'll tell you, it happened behind a curtain in a hallway. Uh, and as a matter of fact, I was that small fish. Okay. And this is about 2000, I'm going to estimate 15 or 16. Okay.
Okay.
I was full of trepidation to come up and speak to Anne Shumway Cook. Okay.
Yeah.
I always consider myself a small fish, still do, and I am very happy to be placed always in the small fish category. I came up after she got through speaking, and I just came up next to her, walked alongside of her in a corridor, and I said, as she's talking about closing her career, and I said, Anne, if there's one thing that you haven't done yet that you would still like to do before your career finishes, what would that be? And she says, Mike, I would like to revise the dynamic gait index. And I said, Anne, if there's any role that I can play in that, if there's anything that I can do, if my clinic can support you at all in providing patients as subjects, please let me know. And then it rolled from there. It might have been earlier than 2016. I'd have to look to see what our publication date on that is. It would, matter of fact, it would have had to be. It it would shock me if it was 2012 Chicago, but it might have even been then, because it took us a while to get that study
Oh,
going.
no, it was before then
Was
because
it
we had our first meeting with the people who participated in Chicago.
in
So it was
Chicago?
probably a couple
Okay.
years
So it
before.
was even before that. So
Yeah.
I lose track of actually years. I remember the incident well, but I didn't remember exactly what it was because I've gone to, whatever, 30 different CSMs. So they blend together a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that's right. Oh my gosh. So anyway, I thought I would at least tell you that
Oh,
very funny story. She obviously had the seed already in her mind,
yes.
but I attempted to throw a little sprinkles on what I didn't even know was already planted. Uh, but
Yeah,
so
I think,
yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
thank you. Thank you for bringing that story up because I think it shows, you know, how um touching base with these folks who
Mm,
we see as luminaries. Again, it's meaningful because it's a touch point for you. It's also a touch point for them.
yeah,
And, I think Anne would probably, you tell her that and she goes, "Oh yeah, I
yeah,
totally remember that." So again,
yeah,
don't be
yeah.
afraid to go up and
That's
be
right.
like a groupie
Right.
at some
Yeah,
presentation because
yeah.
people remember that and they'll remember you.
Yeah, yeah, that's so good. Well, Patty, let's both root the Mariners on today.
Yeah,
They're inching toward first place with the very surprising, uh, let's just say, athletics team of what we can't ascribe a city to, leading in
true.
first place. But by the time this comes out next Tuesday, potentially the Mariners will be tied for first place. We'll see.
Or over 500.
Yeah, that's all they need to be is right there.
That's
Yeah, yeah.
right. Mike,
Oh
it's
my
been a
goodness.
joy. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you so much for
And
your
thanks for all
time.
you do.
Uh, I want to echo back the same and for our friendship to continue. You take
Yes,
care and have a great remainder of your day.
you too. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.